Out here, it's not only the amazing views, but the way time stretches out a little longer. How laughter bellows louder among friends, and how the breeze hits just right at the summit. With All Trails, you can discover and experience the best of nature, with over 450,000 trails worldwide and navigation right at your fingertips. Find your outside with All Trails. Download the free app today and find your next outdoor adventure.
Ever wonder what your lashes are destined for? The cards have spoken. Maybelline New York Mascara does it all. Whether you crave fully fan lashes with Lash Sensational, big, bold volume from the Colossal, a dramatic lift with Falsies Lash Lift, or natural-looking volume from Great Lash, your perfect lash future awaits. Manifest your best mascara today. Shop Maybelline New York and discover your lash destiny. Shop now at Walmart.
Hiya and welcome again to the Explaining History podcast. Hope you enjoyed our interview double bill yesterday. There is so many amazing people to talk to at the moment that I thought, well, let's go and really kind of give you as much great content as we can. So hopefully we'll be able to do that again in the future, but there are plenty of the really interesting interviews coming up. So many really great books out there just on coming to publication. We can't cover them all. So, you probably heard me in the past look with a critical eye, and I'm not the only one to do this. This is kind of common currency really here in Great Britain, at this idea of the British special relationship, and the fantasy that is, the idea that there is something kind of special about the relationship between British prime ministers and American presidents. That said, it was a relationship that David Ben-Gurion, of all people, Prime Minister of Israel, said, we must emulate that. We must have the kind of the ear of Washington in that kind of intimate way. And arguably, current events show us that the primary ally of the United States of America is Israel. There are a few countries in the world that America would give its unconditional support to, and there are reasons for that. But we talked about Israel a lot in the last few days, so let's veer away from that one and look at one of the primary drivers of the special relationship, and that is really the kind of the absence of an independent British foreign policy. We have a foreign secretary. We have an entire ministry, the Foreign Office, as it is generally known, because of various iterations. And we're a country that likes to think of ourselves as having a foreign policy, but it is one that has for well over half a century been dictated by Washington, D.C., as has Britain's defence policy. One only needs to look at the decision by Macmillan back in the early 60s to abandon the Blue Streak missile in favour of American missile systems. To observe that. So how has this come to pass? Well, the kind of obviously the founding moment of British imperial kind of decline, but also British Atlanticist fantasy is obviously the Second World War. Right from the get-go, Churchill knew that without American intervention into the war was at very best an ugly stalemate, but probably most likely lost. And the combined efforts of the entirety of the British Empire weren't going to be enough to defeat the Axis powers. And so he knew that the productive power of the United States of America needed to be brought into the war, and famously wrote that he went to bed and slept the sleep of the thankful and the saved, I think is the quotation, though you can correct me on that, when Pearl Harbor happened. Prior to that, obviously, there had been at least 2 years of Lend-Lease, and Roosevelt had done everything in his power to try to assist Britain through the kind of as the kind of the arsenal of democracy, and had tried to do as much as possible to supply Britain. And there is, by the summer of 1941, essentially a de facto shooting war between America and Nazi Germany in the Atlantic, as American convoys become increasingly armed and protected to take ships across the Atlantic to Great Britain, and are attacked by U-boat wolf packs. And Hitler essentially says, well, the Americans have shown their hand here, and they are doing everything in their power to help the British. Therefore, we are, effectively, it's undeclared, but we're effectively at war with them. And when Hitler takes the decision after the attack on Pearl Harbor to declare war on America, the day after Pearl Harbor, it's really because he's saying, well, we are fighting a war with America anyway, so we may as well now, in this historic moment, obviously it was a category error, we may as well join with Imperial Japan. Right from the beginning, in the first meetings between Churchill and Roosevelt had his eye on what a post-war world would look like. And one of the key American war objectives, let us not forget, was a kind of soft dismantling of the British Empire, a removal of tariff barriers and currency convertibility rules. And Churchill knew this would kill the British Empire. The American negotiators at Placentia Bay wrap all this up in the language of freedom, and freedom of the seas, and free navigation, and free trade, and free this and free that. But Churchill wasn't fooled. He said, well, no, we're not going to allow American goods to pour into India. Absolutely not. But during the war, the ways in which foreign policies become aligned and foreign policy goals become aligned at the wartime conferences, and some British war goals and foreign policy aims become suborned to American ones, show that by the end of the war, the foreign policy position of Great Britain is quite dramatically altered. That it's not the British Prime Ministers at this point necessarily need to go and ask permission from Washington. That doesn't happen really till after Suez. But what does happen is that British Prime Ministers are very, very mindful of the degree of Britain's bankruptcy, the fact that Britain cannot reasonably expect to control its empire any longer. If you look at Forgotten Wars and Forgotten Armies by Harper and Bailey, and Srinath Raghavan's India's War, the picture that emerges there is that that the British Empire in Asia collapses because Indian soldiers will not comply. They will not fight in Britain's wars in Asia any longer, and Britain has lost essentially the moral and political authority, even by 1945 and 1946, to insist that Indian soldiers become Britain's Asian policemen, or continue to be Britain's Asian policemen. Independence follows swiftly after that. But by 1945, 1946, the British are still considering ways in which India might be retained. They only give it up when they think, well, our manpower there is gone. There's simply no way, without a million possible sepoy soldiers, that we can do this. Britain can't rule India through force of arms, obviously. So the decline in Britain's world status, with the kind of decline of its empire, which had been killed by 2 world wars, and its wartime indebtedness, the fact that, as David Edgerton puts it, something changes in Britain after 1945. Britain, instead of being a kind of imperial nation, focuses on there's a shift in British society, the economy, in Britain's political classes, to the development of the nation itself. Britain becomes more nation-oriented than it does simply by being the metropole of an empire. You can see this happen in many different countries, from the Spanish Empire to the Ottoman Empire, which dies by the early 1920s. All of a sudden, there is this sort of resurgence of mental and emotional focus on the former imperial heartlands themselves. And Britain is quite badly hit by the war in a number of key ways. I mean, there is the bombing damage of Britain is as nothing compared to parts of mainland Europe. But Britain is significantly poorer, and Britain's adjustment, and again, this is the kind of an ongoing crisis that Britain seems never to be able to get over. Britain's adjustment to a post-imperial world has a kind of a rude awakening in 1956, when the last attempt at independent imperial action, coordinated with France and Israel, the seizure of the Suez Canal zone, which had been vacated 2 years earlier, to prevent the canal from being nationalised. This is this is greeted with anger in Washington. It is Eisenhower threatens embargoes on Great Britain. He threatens a run on the pound, and to kind of collapse the British economy. And it was his way of reminding the British to know where their status lay. That they were now not an imperial power any longer, because we transitioned from the Cold War into the era of I beg your pardon. We've transitioned from an imperial era, of a great power imperial era, through the kind of the crises of the Second World War, into a period of Cold War rivalries, and the kind of like one of the wild card factors in this period of time is the kind of the relative decline of European empires. The fact that European empires decolonize, and there is a kind of an undeclared war in the global south to align these with their various camps, and mainly for America to kind of punish wayward states, places like Vietnam, for example, that have either national kind of liberation directions, or are allying themselves with the Soviet Chinese bloc. So the reduction of Great Britain from its kind of imperial, it's the heights of its imperial power, to being, I don't necessarily want to write off the relationship as being a kind of client vassalage kind of relationship. That maybe kind of is where it is now, but to being a kind of a useful deputy. America has these kind of useful deputies around the world in different parts of the world, states that can put a bit of stick about when it comes to kind of policing that part of the world. Britain was useful as a kind of a transatlantic bridge, famously when American presidents wanted to understand what was happening in Europe, they'd ask a British Prime Minister. The current situation with Israel and Iran, where Trump is either attempting to kind of perform this sort of Nixon type kind of uncertainty, this sort of kind of like madman doctrine, nobody knows what he's going to do, or it is that he's just generally so unpredictable and so changeable on a day-to-day basis that what you're seeing is what's actually real. You have a kind of a largely political incompetence in the guise of Sir Keir Starmer, our Prime Minister, a guy who prides himself on having no ideology, prides himself on having no vision, and says that he simply does whatever he views to be pragmatic on a daily basis. He is now faced with the question as to whether a handful of British aircraft will join in the bombing of Iran, and he's signalling that he's very much open to it, despite the fact that the previous Labour administration, after the Iraq war in 2003, they won a further election in 2005, but there was a kind of a steady decline in Labour's fortunes thereafter, and they've largely never been forgiven for Iraq.
This summer, Instacart is bringing back your favorites from 1999 with prices from 1999. That means 90s prices on juice pouches that ought to be respected, 90s prices on box mac and cheese, and 90s prices on ham, cheese, and cracker lunches. Enjoy all those throwbacks and more at throwback prices, only through Instacart. $4.72 maximum discount per $10 of eligible items. Limit one offer per order. Expires September 5th while supplies last. Discount based on CPI comparison.
Out here, we feel things. The sore calves that lead to epic views, the cool waterfall mist during a hot hike, and the breeze that hits just right at the summit. But hey, don't just listen to us. Experience it for yourself. All Trails makes it easy to discover the best of the outdoors, with more than 450,000 trails around the world, points of interest along the trail, and offline maps for always-on navigation. Download the free app today and find your next outdoor adventure.
Ever wonder what your lashes are destined for? The cards have spoken. Maybelline New York Mascara does it all. Whether you crave fully fan lashes with Lash Sensational, big, bold volume from the Colossal, a dramatic lift with Falsies Lash Lift, or natural-looking volume from Great Lash, your perfect lash future awaits. Manifest your best mascara today. Shop Maybelline New York and discover your lash destiny. Shop now at Walmart.
Whatever happens with Iran will be a magnitude disaster. If Western powers choose to become involved, will be a disaster of a much, much greater magnitude for a variety of reasons, due to kind of demographics, population size, and the martial abilities of Iran, which are not inconsiderable. And of course, despite what is being said in various hawk-like neocon circles and their clan journalists, Iran does not now and has never had a nuclear weapon, and is probably a very long way away from acquiring one. Anyway, that aside, so you have this sort of supine quality of British prime ministers. There's the odd moment, such as Margaret Thatcher and the Falklands War, where Thatcher decided that there was no question of allowing British subjects to be ruled by an Argentine dictatorship. And Reagan would probably have been happy if the whole problem had sort of gone away. And she had some harsh words for him. But for the most part, British prime ministers have danced to the tune of the United States of America. The great exception is was Harold Wilson. Harold Wilson declined Lyndon Johnson's invitation to send British troops to Vietnam. Australia sent their troops. There were even South Korean troops in Vietnam, and a handful of other kind of American client states, but not Britain. Wilson was wise enough to know, and one of the reasons why British troops were sought after is because they already had expertise from the Malayan emergency, and they were far and away some of the most experienced troops in jungle warfare. Wilson could see that this was a very, very poor decision, potentially. That said, Wilson's government did not oppose the Vietnam War, and in many ways tacitly supported it. So here's a section from People's Peace by Kenneth O. Morgan, and he writes, this is kind of by the mid to late 1960s, the Wilson government is running into some serious economic and social trouble. Kenneth Morgan writes, in the course of 1967, Labour's fall from grace became even more acute. It was much hastened by failure in overseas policy, which added to the sense of national decline. Wilson, in fact, sought in 1964-7 to maintain the vestiges of Britain's position as a world power, both in strategic and financial terms. Thus it was agreed, almost without debate, that Britain would retain its Polaris missiles and indeed embark on an even more expensive system, what became known in the 1970s as the Cheveline warheads. From 1967 onwards, the decision not to devalue the pound was intimately linked to the wish to preserve Britain's role as a world banker and keep sterling as a major reserve currency. Wilson thought that there was some nationalistic pride in not devaluing. But if you have a strong pound, it means that your country, your financial elites, your financial institutions become magnets for foreign currency. It causes all untold harm to your manufacturing industry. But this is really part of a longer transition of Britain moving away from being the manufacturing powerhouse that it once was to being a centre of financial services, from being a manufacturer to a banker, which is kind of accelerated by Margaret Thatcher, but doesn't begin then. Harold Wilson made much of his close relationship with President Lyndon Johnson, who in return publicly compared him with Shakespeare, Milton, Churchill, and other national heroes. Closer to the reality was the pithy observation of Walt Rostov in February 1967, at the time of attempted British mediation over Vietnam. We don't give a goddamn about Wilson. The general perception of Wilson unsuccessfully acting as peacemaker between the Americans and the Soviet Prime Minister Kosygin, while in practice going along with a highly unpopular US policy of the mass bombing of North Vietnam in return for US financial aid. It was a deeply unpleasant vision of a client relationship. In effect, though, it confirmed the subordinate status of Britain in the transatlantic alliance dating from the 1957 Bermuda Conference. One key aspect of the relationship, of course, was the US financial assistance to bail out the ailing British economy and prop up the pound. This was broadly confirmed in talks between President Johnson and Harold Wilson in Washington in June 1967. The other was the pressure imposed by the Americans on the British to maintain its defence commitments east of Suez. As a result of this, despite moves towards economy in the defence budget promoted by Minister of Defence Denis Healey, aimed at reducing the budget to below £2 billion after 1970, British worldwide troop withdrawals proceeded at a slow pace. The 1967 Defence White Paper confirmed that British forces would be withdrawn from Aden, and that the United Kingdom would not conclude a defence agreement with Saudi Arabia, with Southern Arabia, as it was, when it became independent in 1968. On the other hand, a withdrawal from bases in Malaysia and Singapore was scheduled in the mid-1970s. No date was given for a retreat either from Hong Kong or from the Persian Gulf, while there was also talk of maintaining islands such as Bahrain, Cocos, Aldabra, and Aldabra in the Indian Ocean. In the same region, fishermen and farmers of Diego Garcia were in fact, and this is obviously hugely topical at the moment, deported to Mauritius to allow the Americans to use their island home as a nuclear base. Humanitarianism set aside, Britain's dependent status in the Atlantic Alliance meant a maintenance of expensive post-imperial military commitments against the better judgments of the British government itself. So Britain's decision not to become involved in the Vietnam War in the Wilson years, hailed as kind of Wilson's most principled stance. You have to look at that wider context of the fact that Britain maintained foreign bases mainly because they were useful for American ships to dock at, American troops to be barracked at periodically, and airfields that American jets could fly from. They're kind of these handy things that America also doesn't have to pay for. And America, essentially bails out the pound by buying British debt, which is probably something that was not worth doing, but America did it anyway in order to maintain leverage over Britain. So that's just one example of Britain's kind of absence of post-war absence of foreign policy for much of the post-war era, its own foreign policy.
This is Paige DeSorbo from Giggly Squad. Boost Mobile is no longer that prepaid wireless company you remember. They've invested billions into building their own 5G towers across America. With Boost Mobile's networks, customers enjoy the speed and service they'd expect from the big three. Plus, groundbreaking benefits you'd only get from a true challenger of the industry. Boost Mobile will let you try the network risk-free for 30 days. So visit your nearest Boost Mobile store or find us online at boostmobile.com today.
Ready to elevate your everyday? Quince has the luxe staples insiders swear by, minus the markup. From 100% European linen styles and 14-karat gold jewelry to gorgeous leather bags and elevated home finds, Quince has it all. And by partnering directly with top artisans and ethical factories, Quince delivers premium quality at half the cost of similar brands. Discover everyday luxury without the markup at Quince. Go to quince.com/style upgrade for free shipping and 365-day returns. Quince.com/style upgrade.
Post 9/11, you see an acceleration of that, and mainly from the kind of the calculations of Blair, which weren't even remotely as astute as even Wilson's. Blair's mixture of kind of this sort of naive liberal interventionism, the idea that you can invade countries and magically make them democratic after killing huge numbers of their civilians, and his misreading of the neocons, his idea that somehow was what they were intending or interested in, and his own kind of egotism and cynicism led him to essentially place British forces at America's disposal. George W. Bush, in all fairness to him, said to Blair before Iraq, "You don't have to do this. You don't have to be involved in this if you don't want. If that's helpful for you in your domestic situation." And Blair said, "No, we're all in." and perhaps he was having fond memories of his relationship with Clinton and the kind of the intervention, which is far more successful in the Balkans. But I doubt it. I doubt it. So we now look at the situation with Starmer and Donald Trump, and the ability of British foreign secretaries and prime ministers and their civil servants, I think, to think differently, to contemplate other courses of action. Post Brexit, of course, is greatly diminished because there is quite literally nowhere else to go. But also there is, the kind of the institutional memory that creates, independent foreign policies isn't there. It's, foreign policy has been outsourced to the USA for a long, long time, and so it's not there. And so you have these supine characters like Starmer, who is happy to go along with an American president who doesn't know what he's doing, evidently, and hasn't got an idea of what he wants to do, changes his mind from day to day, is currently rolling up democratic rights in his own country, has essentially, by walking away from the Iran deal in the first place, manufactured the crisis that we're in, and is being kind of largely led by the whims of Benjamin Netanyahu. So the idea that a British Prime Minister would nod and go along with this indicates that something fundamental in the workings of the British state has ceased to function, probably some time ago. There was the last bit in David Edgerton's book, The Rise and Fall of the British Nation, is that he says that Iraq showed us that the ability of the British state to formulate sensible, meaningful, workable foreign policies had completely evaporated. And here we are. It follows, in other ways, the hollowing out of the state, and the kind of the replacement of a kind of a robust and functioning state with a kind of a set of kind of semi-privatized crises. I'm sure there's some kind of correlation, or at least connection there. But there we go. There we have it. So if you see Britain throwing its lot in with America in a fool's errand of historic proportions, then there is a kind of a longer historical picture behind that. But yeah, I'll leave you there and take good care. All the best. Bye-bye.
This is Paige, the co-host of Giggly Squad. I use Uber Eats for everything, and I feel like people forget that you can truly order anything, especially living in New York City. It's why I love it. You can get Chinese food at any time of night, but it's not just for food. I order from CVS all the time. I'm always ordering from the grocery store. If a friend stops over, I have to order champagne. I also have this thing that whenever I travel, if I'm ever in a hotel room, I never feel like I'm missing something because I'll just Uber Eats it. The amount of times I've had to Uber Eats hair items like hairspray, deodorant, you name it, I've ordered it on Uber Eats. You can get grocery, alcohol, everyday essentials in addition to restaurants and food you love. So in other words, get almost anything with Uber Eats. Order now. For alcohol, you must be legal drinking age. Please enjoy responsibly. Product availability varies by region. See app for details.
Who says luxury has to come with a steep price tag? Quince brings you hotel-quality sheets and linens without the markup. From breathable bamboo bedding to spa-worthy bath towels, Quince makes every corner of your home look and feel luxurious. And by partnering directly with top artisans and ethical factories, Quince delivers premium quality at half the cost of similar brands. Upgrade your home for less at Quince. Go to quince.com/home upgrade for free shipping and 365-day returns. Quince.com/home upgrade.